Okay, on to the next topic I'd like to talk about today, and this topic is having an open mind. And this is really hard. I feel like this is the first. Every time you learn a new skill, right, you get better and better at this. And this is very hard to learn at the beginning, especially if you don't have any experience with this before. But generally, people are very convinced that their way of thinking is the best. And it makes sense because, like, evolutionarily, like, we need to adopt a way of thinking that seems to make sense to the world and our situation with the world, and then use that thinking, right, to make our way through the world. But humans are really unique, and we can change and grow. And I don't even know where I'm going with this. Anyways, it's important to have an open mind and be willing to change your way of thinking, because I'm going to be honest, whatever your way of thinking is whenever you first start a skill, or even if you've been doing a skill for a long time, your way of thinking is probably not the most accurate. Otherwise, you would be really, unless you're, consistently beating other high level people and for example, chess, you're very high elo and you can beat all new players, or jiu-jitsu, you have no problem, competing with anyone in your gym, or maybe you're even beating everyone in your gym, right? But if you're not at that high tier, then your way of thinking is probably flawed in some way. Of course, nobody's perfect. Everyone has their own, I want to use like a Japanese word, if you know the word tekito in Japanese, but everyone has their own like way of thinking, right? That they've kind of just created themselves from various sources and various things of input. But again, if you're not, competing regularly with, high level people, then your way of thinking is probably not correct. So you need to start with the foundation that any assumption I've already made about my skill, I need to be willing to update that assumption or change it completely or discard it and add something new, right? Because if you're not willing to accept that fact, then you're going to stick with your own way of thinking, and nothing's going to change, right? If you don't change the way you think, the way you're perceiving whatever skill you're doing, then obviously your elo isn't going to change. Those little like micro moments, and for example, like in like League of Legends or in Rocket League, like the moments, for example, where nothing's happening, but you have to decide what you're going to do, where you're going to go, where you're going to spend your time and resources. If you're not open to, changing those small minor things and the assumptions you have about those things, you're not going to improve. And, really it can be like really small things sometimes that won't actually improve what you're doing a lot, but you have to be open to accepting those things. If you're not open and you're very closed in your way of thinking, it's going to be extremely difficult to change what you're doing. You see this all the time. I see this in jiu-jitsu, League of Legends, Rocket League, chess, you name it. People are so convinced that their way of thinking is right and that their teammates are all wrong and it's always their teammates' fault, or that they're just unlucky, or things like that. And that kind of thinking, it comes from the assumption that everything you're doing is correct. But I can tell you right now, if you're not at the highest tier of whatever game you're playing, or you're not in the top 1-2%, then your way of thinking is probably quite deeply flawed in some fundamental way. And until you accept that and are open to changing that and changing your assumptions, then nothing's going to change. So, yep. Anyways, I'll see you guys in the next one.